everybody, it's Tracy Brown. Oh, you are back as part of the Achieving Inclusion Summit. Thank you for being here. It is really my pleasure to host these conversations and this summit because I really believe that all of us, especially those of us who are committed to inclusion and who are doing this work all the time, we need the information, we need the inspiration, and we can learn so much from each other. So I hope it has been helpful for you to hear some different perspectives, to maybe meet or be introduced to some people that you didn't know before, and to have a few minutes to just reflect internally. Oh, what else do I want to know? Where can I go next? How can I use this information in the way that I am an advocate or a champion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? This conversation, I promise you, you do not want to miss. And I can tell you in advance that I want you to hit share. I want you to repost. I want you to share it with others who you believe will also benefit from both the information and the energy of my next guest. Her name is Simma Lieberman. She is based out of Northern California. She is a speaker, a consultant. She is a published author of several books, and she is the host of the podcast Everyday Conversations on Racism. So, Simma, let me welcome you in. Hey.
Hi, Tracy. I'm so happy.
And you saw me hesitate, right? Everyday conversation on race.
That's why that's why I want to change the name, but I haven't figured out how to do
But
that.
no, I was so focusing on not saying about race.
Oh, okay.
Right, because I always want to say about race, and then I said racism. So whatever, let's just know that people are going to remember better than I did, and they'll be just like me. The way I don't never really talk about the whole title of the podcast, I just tell people to go to raceconvo.com. Right?
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So before we dive in, is there anything like in your background? What do you want to tell people about Simma other than the very high level comments I just made? Who are you anyway?
Well, I'm a Jewish woman over 70, born and raised in the Bronx, and white. And I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I started being involved in issues around race when I was really young. Like I was 8 years old when these young boys attacked our synagogue when we were the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. And I was in synagogue with my father praying, and these kids just came in like crashing through the door, and they were throwing things at us and calling us names and saying like horrible names for Jews, like Sheeny and Kike. And they would sing, I'll never forget this, they would sing, "When Irish eyes are smiling, blah, 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 blah." And I was scared. I was so scared. And I knew that they didn't know us. And I remember thinking, even at 8, how can these people who don't know us hate us so much? And then I said, I wanted to get to know people who were different than me, because most of the people I knew until I was about 7 or 8 were Jewish. And I said, I want to know people who are different than me, because also I had grown up shortly after the Holocaust. So that was on we had that trauma. And I said, I want to get to know people who are different so I wouldn't be afraid of them. But I wanted them to get to know me so they wouldn't be afraid of me, so that they would understand me. And I looked around, and even at that young age, I thought, okay, who else gets, I guess I must have used the term picked on because of their differences. And I thought non-white people, and that probably was mostly like black people, because that's who was, around me. And I got involved in the civil rights movement. Went on picket lines. I went and marched on Washington. But I got to know, I mean, I grew up around and embedded in with a lot of Black people, mainly Black and brown people. But that, so that's who I grew up with. And that became like my family. And as I got older, it became the issue around race just became very personal to me, became very personal because I thought, well, they're attacking people who I consider family, and I'm Jewish. And I had grown up at that time, because it was so soon after the Holocaust, with the connection between, for me, the Holocaust and the Underground Railroad, and slavery. And Harriet Tubman was when I was 8, Harriet Tubman was my idol, and I did a puppet show about Harriet Tubman. It was like a little stick figures.
A puppet show?
Yeah, I had like these little puppets.
Okay.
It's called a diorama in like a shoebox, I think it was, or whatever, or some big box. I don't know. But I didn't know any different. And so it became very personal to me because I thought, well, I'm Jewish. I have friends, a lot of friends that are Black. I consider them like people I'm really close to. If they're being discriminated against, I'm being discriminated against. And, as I got older, a lot of my life was around people of color, and my family is interracial. So I don't look at it like that I'm coming from like a racial tourism thing, where people go, oh, tell us about your culture. Tell us about your people. What do they feel about, how do they feel about George Floyd? I'm going to ask the only Black person I know, so for me, it is not, it's so personally and inside of me so important because I think it's other people's freedom is my freedom.
So you have had a background that you have really done a lot of business around all aspects of diversity and how to build inclusive work environments and cross-cultural communication. I mean, when people look you up, they're going to actually see all these things you've done. So I'm curious, what made you focus the podcast on conversations on race?
That's a really good question, because at first I got to tell you, some people said, well, if you did it on more than just race, then you get a lot more listeners. I said, but it's a conversation on race. They could listen to other podcasts. The reason I did it, two reasons, was one, I was having a lot of people were calling me, like a lot of my Black friends or my brown friends were calling me and saying, oh, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, is it racist? What should I do? Or I told my friend, told my white friend to call you, that you'd be able to help them. So I thought, okay, that's cool. And then I'd have like white people calling me up and saying, hey, do you think I was racist when I did blah, blah, blah? And other people too, like my Latino friends would say, do you think this is racist? And, or this is really racist. And I thought, well, you know what? I need to do something. So I want to have a conversation on race to really talk about it and bring people together. Plus, in the beginning, I just really wanted to have everyday people because I missed my friends. And I thought, well, this is a good way for me to like connect with my friends by having them on the show. And my idea originally was to always have like two people from two different backgrounds, but sometimes it's hard to coordinate. When I can do that, I love it, but a lot of times I don't. But it's always going to be, if it's just me, white, it's always going to be the guest is always going to be a person of color. If it's a white person, I'm always going to have a guest that's a person of color, because it's a cross-race conversation on race. It's not just white people talking about white privilege, blah, 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 yeah, and I'm guilty. Blah, blah, blah. No, it's not like that.
So you have had a lot of amazing guests. And with over 100 shows, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but when I ask you, like, what show is really, like, if I'm going to just listen to one show, if someone watching this is just going to go listen to one show, like, what's your favorite and why?
Okay. There's been some pretty good shows, though. I've had Kamau Bell on my show, but he wasn't able to be on it for that long. had been jealous on my show, former president of the NAACP. He was on my show. That was amazing. That was one of my favorite too, because he talked about finding out. He always knew he was a descendant of a former slave, but then he found out through DNA and through meeting people at a party that he was actually he was also a descendant of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. And, think about that. You're a Black person, you're president of the NAACP, and you find out that you're also related to General Robert E. Lee. How are you going to deal with that? And the way he talked about it was about the need to bring Black and white people and everybody else together and to have like racial healing. Another show that I had, I know you only asked about one, but I just have to, is a show that I have not showed yet. It's going to be posted. It's with Ed Cronin and Mike Alexander. Ed is white, Mike is Black. They are both ex-police chiefs. And white, Ed Cronin, wrote a book about systemic racism in the police department, but it's stories about how he came to understand about race. And then Mike speaks about this, because here you have a Black police chief in Texas in a white town. So he's got to deal with like the racism of Black police officers. I mean, of the racism of white police officers, plus racism of people that he arrested or who were in the community. And both of them talk about like how they come to terms with that and their love for the police department, but the changes that they need to see. And then another show I think is good is Joel Brown and Leigh Manuel. Leigh Manuel is Chinese American and Joel Brown is African American. And it was an Asian Black conversation. And they talked about what it meant to be Asian, Chinese American, what it meant to be African American. But they talked about the stereotypes they heard about each other growing up and how they come together. And then, okay, I got to say that one show, though, is so good. I love it. It's with Dorian Nunez, who is, he's from New York. He's Black and Puerto Rican. He grew up in the Bronx. He had 3 degrees from Harvard. Like, it's not enough degrees. And he was on Wall Street for 50 years. He still is. But he also he designed and teaches a class on Black wealth. And he talks about wealth inequities. And then he invites people to basically contact him so he could help more people create wealth through entrepreneurship and through wise investing. And a lot of times you don't hear that. A lot of times you don't hear that. You hear people talk about, oh, money is bad. But he talks about, what can you do to dismantle racism, redlining, while at the same time feeling good about who you are and also build wealth. So that was my long answer to your short question.
Well, one of the things that I know, because I have watched several, actually many episodes of the podcast now, is that I could not choose just one, but I knew if I said your favorite 4 or 5 that you would give me 10. So all of those are really, really good ones. But here's a question for you. So a lot of times people will say, well, a podcast where you're talking about race. So talking about race, we've been talking about race for decades, for centuries. If talking about race could change things, we wouldn't even have racism anymore. So for the person who's thinking, well, just talking about it doesn't matter, like, what would you say to give them a different perspective?
Well, I would say you have to talk about it to understand it. You have to talk about it if you want to get into solutions and you want to take action. And I can tell you right now that I've had people listen to my show and say, well, I'm white. I've never really had, talked to a Black person or an Asian person before. I didn't really understand what they were going through. And listening to your show has opened up my eyes. And now I want to do something. And I've had several people say that, like, what can I do? I want to do something, or I want to unlearn the racism that I was taught growing up. And then we also offer solutions. This is what you can do. So it's more than just talking, because I do know that a lot of people will say, well, we're going to have a conversation about race and that's going to get rid of racism. No, getting rid of racism is action. I mean, people, it's systemic, but who creates systems? People create systems, and people can dismantle systems, but first they have to understand them. And one thing about my show is I said, like, everyday conversations, because people get really personal, and a lot of people don't understand the personal side of racism and how racism has really impacted people, because I want to create empathy. And it's easy for people, even like you have a lot of intellectual people and academic people who are like anti-racist. I mean, we need everybody. But the people who listen to my show, for the most part, are not that way. You know, I have people, okay, you got to define that term, because a lot of people listening don't understand it. Because those are the people that we want to bring in. We need those people. We need the people who are going to take action, and who maybe they never, I mean, you can talk all you want about racism. You know, I see a lot of people do that. I see a lot of people talk about racism. I was talking to this white woman the other day, and she said, "Oh, I'm anti-racist, blah blah blah." And the stuff that she said she was doing to be anti-racist, I'm like, "What?" I don't remember what it was, but I said, "Well, how many people of color do you know?" Well, I don't really have any in my social circle. I don't really know people. So if you don't know people, how are you really going to know what to do on a day-to-day level? Because there's a systemic part of racism, right? It's historical, it's systemic. We have to break down the systems. But then there's the everyday, because people can't just wait until, you know, the whole system is dismantled. What happens when you have that Black person or that looking for a job, you know, and people have biases? What are you going to do about that? You say, well, I have Black Lives Matter sign up, and I'm voting against this. Hey, all that is cool. And I'm speaking out against racism. That's cool. You can speak out against racism. You know, a lot of people want to just cancel somebody who makes like a mistake, but we need everybody. So I think we really need to educate. And that's what I'm hoping that I'm trying to do, is educate people, have them want to educate other people, have them learn, and have them take action. Because obviously just talking, well, I was in this group, and yes, we did have we sat down with the racists, and we had a difference of opinion, but that was okay. No, it's not okay. People say, I'm not trying to change anybody's minds. Oh, yes, I am. I am trying to change your mind, because if you think that certain things are okay and they're not, no, I'm trying to change your mind. If I, like I said to somebody, they said, what about your show? I said, if I could stop one white person from calling the police or one Black person and getting them killed, I'll have done a job here, because you don't know what kind of action to take. And you've got to get to know people. I mean, you really do, no matter what. Ultimately, you got to get to know people, because if not, your bias is going to impact who you work with. I mean, I have to tell you, you know, you're Black, you know more than I do, but that people can still be anti-racist, but they could do something really messed up or excuse an act of racism. Say, well, I don't believe that.
Well, you are definitely going to, and already have had an impact on way more than one person in one situation. And people who subscribe to the podcast and get the notices, they are going to get an education. And it is from the perspective of people who are from every different group, age group, different parts of the world. So I love that. But let's say no one listens to the podcast, and today is their only exposure to you. What are three specific things that you can recommend that any of us or that individuals can do to interrupt or address racism, especially the impact of racism in the workplace?
Well, first, let me just say, Tracy and I do very well as co-facilitators. You can bring Tracy and I in together to facilitate those conversations in your organization or consult. I mean, really, because you need somebody to help you, because you can't just say, I'm going to have a conversation about race and nobody knows anything. That means you're going to have a problem, because just because you have people from different races or cultures doesn't mean it's good. It's not good until you do something, until you bring it together. The other thing too is you have to start with yourself. Understand who you are. It's not enough to say that you're against racism. but you want to understand, who are you and why haven't you seen things outside of you? And everybody needs to know who they are and why they do what they do. Then you could understand why other people do what they do. Another one is to be able to listen when people are talking about race, when people are listening, when people are talking about something that's happened to them as a person of color, not to immediately go to, oh, well, I don't believe it. Oh, do you have proof? Oh, yeah, well, I get stopped by the cops all the time. Nothing ever happens to me. Yeah, because you're white, okay? So pay attention to that. And then the third one, because if you say, I really place, oftentimes when people hear things, well, you have to understand, what is racist? What is racist? What is discrimination? It's the subtle things that make a difference. But also, you have to practice. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times people will say, well, I'm really against racism, but then somebody will say something racist and they don't say anything. And it's not that they're bad people, but they're not doing a good thing. And have them, I always say to people, let's look at some scenarios. And if this happens, what can you say and what can you do? Because I read a study a long time ago about bystanders, when bystanders see things racist or when being attacked, and they maybe want to do something, but they froze because they didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm going to tell you something. I practice, because when I came up with this idea, I started practicing in my mind. Well, if this happens, what would I do? If that happens, what would I do? I'm thinking, okay, like if I see somebody attacking a black person or a cop attacking, or just not a person of color, but I mean, the biggest issue really is racism against black people, but there's racism against everybody else who's non-white, is to interrupt that tension. So if you see somebody about to attack a person of color and you know that you're not tough enough to like jump in the middle, although I have jumped in the middle and almost got my butt kicked, but because I had practiced too much. I had practiced the scenario too much. It was automatic. But practice, what would you say? What would you do? And here's one thing I would say. This is like on the extreme. If you see somebody attacking like a person, who you see a group of white people or anybody attacking like a black person or a woman, then you have to interrupt that flow of energy. So what you need to do is like either scream about something, take a rock and throw it. And my practice was what happens if I see it in people attacking a person of color in a grocery store. So I start practicing looking for cans that I could throw. And while it might sound funny, the reality is, if you could interrupt that energy or that action, you can actually save lives. And if you know what to say on even a smaller level, if somebody says something racist, you can like start yelling and screaming. But if you really want somebody to change, and they're not like just a stone racist, they're just like, saying something because it's who they are, you could just ask a simple question. What makes you say that? Or why are you saying it like that? And when you do that, it makes somebody think. Because if you just start attacking them, because a lot of people will go to, I used to be, when I was like a teenager, I would attack people. It doesn't do any good. I mean, not if you want people to change, but make people think, say, well, why are you saying that? Well, what do you mean by that? And people say, well, I didn't mean anything by it. Yeah, well, thinking, no, thinking that the black CEO is like, a cafeteria worker. No. So you have to say, well, why did you do that? And they have to look at, well, why did they do that? That was a bias that they had. But we have to, I guess you could say, don't you talk about interrupting bias? Is it you who talks about? So you have to interrupt it, but you have to be prepared in advance, because when you do that, you will automatically know what to do. It's like if there's a fire, you know to call 911. Just do it.
Right. And I think you make a good point here, that it is the practice that gives you the confidence. It's not so much that you have a specific script, but if you've practiced enough, you will be inclined to do something.
Yeah.
And you paraphrase one of my favorite verbal interrupters is that question, what does that mean? Or what did you mean by that? But usually it's like, I will just be, what What does that mean? And not snarky. Like you can't say it in an attacking way. It's like really like I'm clueless. I don't understand why you would say that or what that means. In a physical situation, the example you gave, like, in a grocery store, you are trying to interrupt the energy. And so it's like, oh, I actually never thought about, well, I'm going to grab something off the shelf that's near to me and throw it in that direction, or throw it. I'm not trying to like hit the person in the head with a can of green beans, but to throw it or to create a physical, anything that's going to make someone move, shift, or change the energy. Um, I've trained myself to verbally speak up. And we do live in a society in 2023, in this day and age, where you do have to think about your physical safety. But if you're committed and you've developed some competence in responses and options, then you will find yourself unable to just be a bystander. I do want to, there are two things I want to add to that. One is that um, I agree with you. The reason to practice is so that you will be more comfortable doing it. And even as much experience as I have had, there will occasionally be times when I feel like I don't know what to say, or I will choose not to speak. It's rare, but I had a situation come up a few months ago where it wasn't just between two people, and it was an environment that I wasn't familiar with. And I couldn't tell exactly what was happening. My inner radar said, this person is behaving a certain way because of the other person's race. But it was so subtle that I wasn't sure. And the two people involved weren't giving me enough to actually empower myself, for me to step into the middle of it. So sometimes it can be really, really subtle, but I was prepared to step in. I was prepared to speak up. And that's different than knowing I need to speak up right now, but I don't know what to say. So that leads me to what might be our final question, because time goes so fast. You know that I host and moderate a Facebook group called What Is Mine to Do, where every day we ask the question, what is mine to do to interrupt or end race-based hatred and violence? And as a part of that, 2 or 3 times a year, I lead a program called Breaking the Silence, or Break the Silence Challenge. And it's designed to help people to speak up, to not be silent. And the number one concern when people say, well, I haven't spoken up before because I'm afraid to speak up. That is like the number one thing. So now that you've hosted people on the podcast, in addition to your years of experience in this field, what tips do you have for people who are just still afraid? They're just afraid to talk about race or racism or race relations. It's like they just won't even talk about it from their fear. So give us some tips, Simma.
Okay, first thing is, if you're afraid to talk about race and racism, know that you're not alone. I mean, some people are afraid. They're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing and they're getting attacked, so they say nothing. And other people are afraid because they've been victims of racism, and they're afraid because they're worried about being trivialized and ignored, which has happened to them in the past. But I think particularly, like say you're a white person and you want to know more about what should I say about race? I don't know what to say because that happens a lot. I don't know what to say. Go attend some programs. Now online, you could attend so many programs about race and racism. You could go on LinkedIn Live and they have cross-race conversations where people break up into small groups. And you could start out actually even going to like an all-white group. Like there's that group Surge. I can't remember what it stands for, something about racism and white people. But you could attend anything like that where people talk about how to talk about race. And then, the scary part for a lot of people is, well, how do I talk about it with somebody who's not like me? So that's why I say go attend some online forums, attend some Zoom calls. You could look it up. The internet has so much. There's so many things that you can do, and attend programs. And one thing I would say, probably don't do unless somebody invites you to do it. Don't call, like after something happens like George Floyd, because we know it's going to happen again. We hope it doesn't, but we know it will. Don't call like the one black person go, oh, I feel so bad. What can I do? I mean, it's good to say, what can I do? But don't expect that one black person is going to be able to like be your savior of information. But talk to other white people who do talk about race, but who talk about race and with race. Because if you're only talking about it to people who are just like you, you're not going to really know what to do. It just becomes intellectual. I mean, which is good, like going to the polls and voting in the right people. But on an everyday level, you need to be able to do that. And there's so many resources available. You start by reading books, start by reading how to have the conversation, and then listen to the conversations, and then take a little risk and participate in a conversation.
Those are really good tips.
Call me and Tracy.
Those are really good tips. And they're really good tips not only for people who are white. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about how many brown and black people I know who also are uncomfortable talking about race because they only know how to talk about it from a place of anger, or because they expect that if they're talking to someone of a different race or ethnicity, black, brown, white, that they're not going to understand. And so we do have to educate ourselves about our own cultures, our own ethnicity, and do whatever we can to learn about other ethnic groups as well.
Well, that's why I also said, if you listen to the show with Joel Brown and Leigh Manoir, because a lot of times people know, and I find this with Jewish people too, which it annoys me because, I'm Jewish, so it annoys me that they're doing it. I think they should know better, but they don't. When you find people like these, people understand the racism against their group, but they will still, even though it's not like a racism of power, but it's it's an acting in a racist way towards other groups, because they don't know anything about other groups, and they make assumptions about it. And I'll just say this one last thing, and then I'll shut up. Is that when I had another show where I had an Asian woman on the show, I think she was Korean American, with a black person, and they were talking about the Asian person was talking about Asian people she knew who were afraid to go. This was during COVID. They were afraid to go to the store and go grocery shopping because Asian people were being attacked. And then actually, it was Carol Copeland Thomas was on the show, and we talked about like how COVID was impacting black and brown people who were dying more. But afterwards, a young black friend of mine called and said, I really didn't know about Asian people being afraid to go to the store. She said, I have an Asian neighbor. She said, I'm going to ask her if she wants me to go with her to the store.
Yeah, and that's just beautiful, right? Because it's another example of how we learn from each other and we have to support each other. And one of the most powerful ways to break down the barriers is to build bridges with people who are from different groups than we are. So I love that. I love that you said yes. I am so happy to have spent this time with you. And I can't encourage people enough to absolutely check out the podcast at raceconvo.com. Thank you so much, Simma.
Thank you, Tracy. And and anytime Tracy asks me to do anything, I'm going to say yes. I don't even know what it is. That's how much I trust Tracy.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening in. Please share, please like, please give us feedback. And if you have questions, please let us know at achievinginclusion.com. We offer free webinars every quarter, and most of the topic ideas come from people who have participated in events like this that we have hosted. My name is Tracy Brown. Please enjoy the rest of the summit. If there were any sessions that you have missed, then you can just scroll down and search for them, or you can go to achievinginclusion.com and see links where you can find them. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next session.